Hi everyone, can everyone hear me? Excellent, thank you everybody. So this is the final panel of Saturday. So my name's Nicola, I'm one of the QED organisers and I'm going to be chairing the panel this afternoon. And I think we're going to be in for a really interesting discussion about the wellness industry. So before we kind of kick off, I'm going to throw to my panellists and let them introduce themselves. So Jonathan, do you want to start with you?
Sure, you probably know who I am by now. My name is Jonathan Jarry. I'm a science communicator for McGill University's Office for Science and Society and the co-host of the Body of Evidence podcast.
Hi, I'm Alice. This microphone needs to be a little closer. I'm Alice. I'm part of the Merseyside Skeptic Society, co-organiser of this conference. I talk a lot about the wellness industry through the podcast Skeptics with a K, but also as a person with chronic illness, I experience lots of the kind of spheres in which that we would encounter lots of these wellness industry things.
Hello, my name is Britt Hermes. I am a scientist in skin microbiome research, but before that, I was a licensed and practicing naturopath in the US. I worked for about 3 years as a licensed naturopath in the States, where I lived, breathed, and profited off of wellness.
Thanks very much. So I just wanted to say that if we're going to try and take a couple of questions during the middle of today's session, so be putting your thinking caps on now, but we'll try and leave space for questions at the end as well. So, as I said, today is the panel about the wellness industry, and specifically, we want to talk about how wellness has become something, actually, that it's something that's to be sold and commoditised, and I suppose with the inevitable consequence, really, that leaves space for exploitation. And while I'm sure that we're all pretty aware how wellness is heavily targeted at women in particular, it's not just something that targets women, but it actually affects, all marginalised groups. So that's kind of what we want to get into as well a little bit today. So for the first question, I'd like to ask, why do we actually need wellness? Britt, can I come to you first on that?
Why do we need wellness? How are we defining wellness? Is maybe a good place to start. So as a naturopath in the States, I defined wellness, the naturopathic profession defined wellness in a very particular way. And this was not necessarily around preventative health care or really being healthy, but rather a lifestyle. And this lifestyle included foods that you ate and supplements that you took and ways that you behaved in order to sort of embody this sort of enlightened, uber healthy individual that was better than the average person on the street, really, to be frank. And when we add women's healthcare into this also became, we were incorporating themes of basically beauty and weight loss and being thin. So there was also these sort of like idealized Gwyneth Paltrow type standards that was incorporated into this. And so if this is our if this is our definition of wellness, then we don't need wellness, right? Because these therapies that I was offering as a naturopath were superfluous, for sure. Now, when I worked in Washington, I was able to work as a primary care provider, which meant I could call myself a physician, I could call myself a doctor, and I could bill insurance. And this was really important because that meant that people could come to me for so-called like regular care. I did pediatric visits, I did wellness visits, I prescribed antibiotics, I gave vaccines with homeopathy to counteract the bad effects. I mean, come on, I'm not a bad naturopath. And so when I was there, it sort of had its own definition. But then when I moved to Arizona, I could also call myself a physician and a doctor, but I couldn't bill insurance. And so what that meant was I needed to change the services that I was offering. And that's when I became more naturopathic, if you will, in that I really began to market and sell these sort of wellness-specific therapies, which is that every person, no matter who you are, needs to come to a naturopath because naturopaths have secret medical knowledge. We know more than the doctor. We can tell you about made-up food allergies. We can tell you which supplements to take, not only what like nutrients specifically, but we know the bad supplement makers from the good supplement makers, and we had all of our criteria to market ourselves. And I think that's where this gets very dangerous and very scary.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Britt. I'm sure we're going to come on to talk about that in a little bit more detail later on. Alice, if I can come to you, building on what Britt said there about, specifically targeting women, but what about if you have a chronic illness, for example, or general ill health? How does wellness impact those groups?
Yeah, and this is building exactly on what Britt said. This is, we don't need wellness, but there's a lot of people who've been sold wellness who need something. You live with difficult symptoms that are often dismissed by doctors. Particularly, this is the case with many chronic health conditions. There are that often affect women more so, and women are then subject to medical bias. They're not given the support that they needing from their doctors. They might be dismissed, that you can't be in that much pain, that it's not that bad, just take this painkiller, just kind of go away. And at that point, it's very easy to become desperate that, but I'm still in a lot of pain, or that I'm still struggling with my gut issues, or I'm still feeling tired all the time. And so turning to somebody who's got the answer, that we can make everything better, we can make you feel better if you just take this supplement, or you come for this treatment, this Reiki practitioner will
lay my hands on
lay your hands on you, and we'll spend maybe an hour consultation. I don't know how long your initial consultations with patients would have been, but
90 minutes.
An hour and a half to talk through everything that ails you, all your problems, a compassionate ear of somebody who's not going to try and just get you out the room as quickly as possible, and will hold your hand and reassure you that I've got the answer, don't worry, we can solve this, and I can put the control back in your hands when you're feeling like you've got no control over these very difficult symptoms that you're living with. Of course, it's very seductive for people, and it's that thing that it's not needed, we don't need wellness, but there's a gap there. There's something that is needed, and the support isn't necessarily there in the medical world in the right way, because it's expensive, or because the waiting lists are too long, or because doctors are so rushed that they have to rush you through. You need something, and that's filling that gap.
Thanks, Alice. So picking up on that, people maybe looking for solutions because they're not able to get it in their sort of primary healthcare provider, so GP, first point of contact, but equally saying, Britt, that actually you might have consulted with somebody for an hour and a half. How, if I can come to you, Jonathan, how, thinking about both those things, how does that fit in with people wanting kind of quick fixes, compared to trying to combat chronic illnesses?
Yeah, I'm going to echo some of the things that Britt and Alice said, but there are a lot of reasons why wellness is appealing to people, and why buying into wellness is appealing, why going to see a practitioner in that space is appealing. Being listened to, right? Feeling that empathy, getting the right amount of time to talk about your problems, having your worries taken seriously. It's something that medicine, because of the structure of the healthcare system, is not very good at, but something that wellness practitioners are very, very good at. Also, to answer your question about simplistic answers, yeah, a lot of the alternatives to medicine, they have a boogeyman, or a bogeyman if you prefer, and they have a panacea, right? So it's the boogeyman panacea combo of this is the cause of all diseases, and we have the cure-all for all of this. There's this feeling of empowerment, of I feel like I'm in control of my health, which we see with astrology, right? Why is astrology so appealing, even with people who don't believe that it is scientific? It's feeling like an element of control there. There's the appeal of side effect-free interventions, which we see a lot in the wellness space. If you're a parent and you're worried about the things you're giving to your kids, oh, look, here's a homeopathic cough syrup that is side effect-free. That is very appealing. The appeal to nature also, which we see a lot in wellness. And again, Gwyneth Paltrow, what's her secret, right? I want to be like her, so it can't be just genetics and wealth. There has to be something else I can tap into, that I can buy to be like this influencer. So all of these elements of answer kind of converge into why wellness is so appealing.
And I think, from what all three of you have said so far, it's simultaneously meant to be very specific and target very individualized symptoms, but at the same time is also incredibly vague in terms of the range of treatments that it can offer. And we've brought Gwyneth up, so let's talk about Gwyneth and Goop. And I suppose in some respects sort of the real trailblazer in terms of creating this wellness industry. And I think that's an important distinction to make, that we're talking about the wellness industry, not just sort of fashion and beauty, which are maybe spin-offs. This is something else in and of itself. Does anybody want to pick up a bit more about Gwyneth and some of these the wide-ranging number of treatments?
Gwyneth is fascinating because she's. And there's snippets of interviews that I've read from Gwyneth Paltrow that are really interesting, because she's savvy. She's a very savvy businesswoman who has recognised that this is something that people are looking for, and has managed to pitch it perfectly as, I am trying to give you empowerment. You're living this difficult life that we all are, like regardless of chronic ill health, we're all ridiculously busy, we're all underpaid, we're all stressed and burnt out and worn down, and she's got the answer, giving you the empowerment to take control. But she also recognises, and I've seen some very interesting quotes from her where I don't have the full quote to hand, but where she very specifically says, I started this trend, I saw where this was going, I blazed this trail, and look, you all thought I was ridiculous, but you're all on my side now because you've seen, well, it makes the money.
Yeah, I mean, there were some pieces before Gwyneth. I think Oprah was definitely dabbling in this realm. Suzanne Summers with hormone therapy was dabbling here. I mean, Hollywood certainly was there. I think for me, growing up in Southern California and going to school in San Diego, there was this, as a young woman, there was a hyper focus on how I looked, and how I looked directly equated with people's, in my mind, perception of how healthy I was. And this idea carried through into my schooling and my training at Bastyr, where I went to naturopathic school in Seattle from 2007, 2011, where we were told, well, this isn't all about naturopathic school, but one of the things that we had to do in naturopathic training was to take philosophy courses. And the philosophy courses were supposed to sort of, supplement the standard medical curriculum we were supposed to be learning, which we weren't, and that's separate.
So you were getting supplements in school.
Yeah, we were getting everything, Jonathan. Name a therapy, I've done it. But that's because we were told that we needed to not only walk the walk and talk the talk, but we needed to look like healthy individuals. So we were literally told by professors and naturopaths standing in front of us that if you don't look like the epitome of health, you will not be successful. And so that led us into experimenting and to doing things and to changing the way we looked and focusing on changing our bodies, and for me, into body dysmorphia, which I think is a major aspect of the female wellness industry. And I think Gwyneth capitalizes on this, and I think it is really just criminal, in my opinion. And so now I've lost my thread a little bit, but I think before Gwyneth, these pieces were here, and for whatever reason,
this has existed for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
It's been I
don't necessarily.
Yeah.
I just don't necessarily agree that she was the trailblazer, because I think I would put.
She's been quite instrumental in really mainstreaming it, right?
I just don't want to give her credit for it.
No.
I think it's interesting for me in sort of the thinking about this topic is that, if you think. So I'm in my 40s, right? So I can remember quite a while ago, and thinking about, the sorts of way we talk about women and women's stereotypes in the media about, focus on sort of, the slim, white, blonde, woman as sort of like the absolute pedestal of beauty and idealism. Those sorts of attitudes, obviously they still persist, but I think there's more recognition now that idealized form of beauty in the media is being challenged and being chipped away at, which quite rightly. But for me, that's where wellness has maybe come in, and wellness has kind of gone mainstream, right? Because now that is just another form of the thin, white, blonde woman as a way of talking about these issues, but calling it something else, calling it about your own well-being, to try and repackage it and make it more palatable for women. It's just another way of telling women to hate themselves, really.
Yeah, and I've seen this language now carry over into sort of aesthetics, where I see like practitioners of Botox, for example, talking about Botox therapies as and fillers as anti-aging preventative wellness therapies, and it's really just about maintaining the appearance of youth.
Ideal, yeah.
And it's aspirational as well. And we're talking about Goop. I mean, the products that Gwyneth sells are not for the masses. Look at the price tags.
Yeah.
It is about elevating you to her social stratus,
Yes.
And so there's a very interesting like socioeconomic angle there. She's not doing this out of the goodness of her heart. She's doing this because you want to be like her, not just look like her, but have the wealth that she has as well.
Be able to have spent hundreds of dollars on pointless eggs to put in your vagina.
Because health is wealth and wealth is
Yeah.
health. That's the
Absolutely,
equation
yeah.
there.
Yeah.
At this point, we've got time to maybe take a very quick question. Would anybody like to ask a question before we carry on? Oh, we've got a question right there. So I'm gonna hand over the mic. So my volunteer is gonna help hand this mic to you. So the gentleman in the grey T-shirt, his hand up. We'll just take your question and then we'll come back to the panel.
Yeah, so my question is sort of two related ideas here. You talk about, the idealized female form and losing weight and stuff. You go to a primary practitioner and the first thing they ask you is your weight. They do the BMI. At the same time, a lot of these primary practitioners are referring people to chiropractors, acupuncturists, herbal remedies. I've had this happen to myself. Like maybe it doesn't happen as much here in the UK, but I imagine it does. How much are real doctors, medical doctors, propping up these alternative medicines and practitioners?
So it is happening, and in part it's because of this very interesting marketing move on the part of alternative medicine, which has rebranded itself as integrative medicine. And the philosophy of integrative medicine is that, Western medicine, in quotation marks, it's good, but it's not perfect. And all these alternative modalities, they're good, but they're not perfect. We need to integrate the two of them to get the best of both worlds. And doctors are human beings, and they may not be good scientists themselves, and they might not be able to look at the literature and critically appraise it. And so when they hear about these things, especially when they know the failings of medicine to treat chronic conditions, for example, and symptoms that just don't go away, it becomes it makes sense for them to send them over to that side of the equation, even though many of these interventions are either disproven or unproven.
It's interesting, I think there is definitely, from what I gather, a big difference between the States and the UK. I have been not offered alternative therapies by my GP, because it'll depend which GP you see. But when I was struggling most with my health condition, I saw this older GP who kind of said, well, really you need some kind of holistic thing. And when you've got a full body condition, I do need something holistic, as in whole body, because that's, you need to think about how the symptoms affect you completely. But then his next sentence was, we used to have a homeopathic hospital in Liverpool. We don't have one anymore. It's like, okay, I do not want to see you anymore. I would like a second opinion, please. And so it does creep in, but a lot less. We don't have so much. There are some specialists who might refer, particularly for chronic pain conditions, might refer for things like acupuncture, but your GP will refer you to the specialist, and then the specialist will hopefully follow evidence-based medicine, at least in the first instance, before they might start throwing alt-med at you. Of course, you're completely right that there is major issues with weight stigma, especially in the medical world, and we could do an entire panel on weight stigma and weight bias in medicine alone, let alone in society, and that is going to feed into people's difficulties, particularly with chronic health problems, that if I go to my GP, they're just going to tell me I need to lose weight and then I won't have as much pain. Well, you're not going to want to go and see your GP, because that's going to be very traumatic to be dismissed and to have your weight focused on, but B, useless, because you're not going to get any support until you prove that you're deserving of it because you are this ideal weight. So that must push people. I can imagine that pushes people down alt medicine routes as well, because they don't trust their doctors.
So I think actually your point there leads quite nicely into the next sort of thing we wanted to cover off there. So on that differentiation between, thinking about people going to their GPs, but from the UK, but from the States and from elsewhere, what is the impact to the patients then? Are they actually able to get what they need, either from GPs, or is it just being substituted by wellness practitioners or wellness social media that they're following? Open that to the... Britt, do you want to come in on that?
No. I'm being cheeky. This is a hard question for me to answer because I feel bad about it, in truth, because I've heard from patients since I left naturopathy and since I began blogging about it. And even when I felt like I was offering something that was more on the end of the innocuous side of the spectrum, counseling, for example, well-meaning dietary advice, there's also the high cost of the visit, the stress and the burden with asking a patient to make major dietary changes, not just for themselves, but often for everyone in that household, frequent follow-up visits. And so this is a hard one for me to answer because on the one hand, I'd like to think that I am a good person and that I was well-intentioned, delusional, but well-intentioned, and that I was doing my best in that moment to offer people what I thought was effective and real. And even if the medicine didn't work, even if the homeopathy didn't work, even if the botanical medicine didn't work, my laying hands on them didn't work, that perhaps there was some benefit to that provider-patient relationship. But I can't say that with certainty because I know from my own personal experience in seeing naturopaths and from speaking to my former patients after the fact that when these therapies failed, the patients took it personally. They often, whether I meant to do this or, unintentionally or not, they were left with the impression that they somehow did something wrong. They didn't take it as prescribed. They cheated and ate gluten that one day because it was their mom's birthday party or whatever. And that was enough to derail that therapy. And they really internalized that. And that can be very, very damaging. Mm-hmm. And so I used to think like, there's benefit to speaking. There's benefit to speaking to a naturopath, perhaps. Perhaps there's something to that patient being heard. Perhaps that's enough for them. But I don't know that I can really stand firmly behind that anymore because I think that there is lots of different ways that patients get harmed that aren't always obvious.
I mean, that is a problem with fake self-empowerment, which it can backfire into blaming the victim. And we also see this in medicine, the war metaphor for cancer, right? Oh, she lost her fight with cancer. Oof. What do you mean she lost her fight? It can feel empowering at the beginning. Oh, I'm fighting my cancer.
Fight this, yeah.
Yes, but then when you lose it, I guess it was her fault. She didn't fight hard enough. So we have to be careful when people want to feel this element of control to not give them this false self-empowerment because then it can backfire and they start blaming themselves when it doesn't when they don't get the results that they were hoping for.
It's really interesting that you say that you saw patients really internalizing that without necessarily your intention for them to internalize that. When I kind of see and interact with other wellness practitioners, there are some that I'm deeply, and I'm sure we'll come on to this later, deeply cynical of that. I think they absolutely don't believe what they're selling, and they will take advantage of that internalization that it must be my fault because, well, if you didn't take it right, then that's why it didn't work, and so it's not our fault, and so we can continue to sell to the next person and the next person. And there will be other people who are practitioners who are well-intentioned but also benefit from that internalization and might even convince themselves, well, I feel bad for this patient, but they just didn't quite get it right, and maybe I just need to really impress upon the next patient to do it exactly as prescribed. So it's interesting to hear that perspective that you had no intention at all for them to feel that way, but they still internalize, and that's part of that wellness industry as a whole.
And it also just feeds into the business model of the naturopath and of the wellness industry because, oh, if treatment A didn't work, don't worry, we still got B through Z to try. And so it's often that the first homeopathic remedy doesn't work, or maybe this detox program wasn't for you, but there's all these different ways to change it up. And we'll find the right program for you because one of the selling points is that this is individualized. It's not a one program fits all sort of application of therapies, which really makes it easy to continuously sell to whoever. I mean, you could walk into my office 100 times and I can sell you 100 different therapies for the same condition.
And then you need maintenance treatments, right?
Well, of course.
Of course. I was going to come on to that actually because, you know, over the long term, people, you know, obviously various different reasons why people might seek out, you know, a wellness practitioner, for want of a better word, over a, you know, regular medical practitioner. But, you know, once they've gone maybe for a quick fix or whatever, is that, you know, part of the model almost to keep people trapped, to continue to make money, to, you know, is that a case of, well, you know, that hasn't worked, we'll just keep trying something else? Or is it some new symptoms or new treatments to just continually be added to help sort of to keep turning that wheel?
So I was in the panel previously, and there was a question about QAnon and gamifying this. And when that question was asked, I sort of had an aha moment in this because I recognized this sort of game behavior in alternative practitioners. In that, here is a patient with a complicated medical history. Medicine, or, you know, they feel like their providers haven't been able to provide either a diagnosis or a therapy that has been effective for them. And it's not quite clear what's happening. The symptoms don't fit into a box. There isn't a nice diagnosis code for whatever it is. But as the naturopath, now my fun is we're going to run a spectrum of panels and we're going to figure this out. And now it's a game because what panels can we do and what sort of like pieces of the puzzle can we put together here to see if we can go down this convoluted path together to sort of come up with a naturopathic explanation
Which
for
false
you.
positives can we get?
All of them.
It's now not that you have this chronic health condition that makes you ill, that makes you tired. It's you've got gluten sensitivity and that's why you're tired, and therefore I'll give you this remedy to deal with the gluten sensitivity.
And if you get worse, this is a naturopathic healing crisis, so even better. So I thought that was a really interesting sort of connection that I hadn't made before, that it wasn't really about necessarily a quick fix. It was actually sort of this like perverse enjoyment in the game of trying to be figuring out something that medicine doesn't have an adequate answer for.
And I think you touched on it earlier as well about, you know, for yourself, when you were a practitioner and treating people, it was done with the greatest intent, you know, genuine intent that you were trying to help people. But clearly, as we know from all fields of the things that we discuss at this conference, there are those people who are doing it genuinely and perhaps come to realise something else. But actually, there are those people that also engage in these things deliberately. And I mean, we've talked about Gwyneth, and I think, you know, we've probably all realised that, or she realises that she's not as magic as she says she is, but I'm sure there's other people maybe that are just as pervasive in this space. I don't know if anybody has any other key people that might spring to mind that are also particularly insidious.
Dr. Oz?
Yeah, who's running for office. It's, I mean, and now on Instagram you have just so many, you just have regular people who can become influencers in wellness and pose at sunset on the beach and sell you supplements on the side. It's becoming easier to become a wellness influencer now. If you look the part and if you have an Instagram account, boom, you can make it through.
And these wellness companies will send you free things that you can promote, and it becomes this vicious cycle. And I wonder, there's this kind of spiral, I think, that, and yes, there's people who are well-intentioned, who are practitioners who come through the other side, as Britt has, which is less common. I think more common is this spiral system where once you start by taking naturopathic remedies or whatever homeopathic remedies you want to take, and then you're kind of in close conversation with a practitioner, and then you think, well, maybe I'll do some courses to become a practitioner, and now I'm a practitioner in this, and now I'm interested in these other therapies, and go down this very deep spiral rabbit hole of woo, and you're now completely involved in it.
Yeah, and politicians have been getting involved, I think, with health matters for a long time. Trump had a supplement company years and years ago. So Dr. Oz was the immediate one that comes to mind, but it doesn't even matter if this person has a name anymore, like Jonathan was saying, because as long as you look nice and that post can go viral through whatever means, it's going to be influential.
And it's not just for women. There's a liver king now for men.
Liver, yes.
Oh, yes.
Oh, is this the guy who eats
who's super jacked and never wears a t-shirt and does all these big stunts on Instagram, like shooting a mattress with what looks like a tank, because I was told by a connoisseur that it's not technically a tank, it's like a mobile cannon thingamajig. But anyway.
Mobile cannon thingy being the technical term.
I don't want to get too scientific here, but yes, that's what it was. But yeah, and this guy understands that you need to do big, loud stunts because those get shared on Instagram, and then he eats a lot of raw meat, a lot of raw organ meat, and so he's selling this as like, well, we have to go back to what our ancestors used to eat, and this is how you get healthy, and so he's an influencer, and it's incredible. I mean, the number of followers, I think it's well over 1 million followers at this point that he has.
That sounds vile.
Social media definitely has a lot to answer for.
Yes.
There's one thing I wanted to just come back and touch on, and you've all mentioned it, but it's that, for me, that onus that has shifted, or maybe it was always there, but it's certainly been re-emphasised, that the onus is on the individual rather than someone else, whether it be an institution or whatever. And I think that on one side you could say, well, that's the person taking control, and we live in a really chaotic world, even more so than perhaps we've experienced, particularly in the last few years, is even more chaotic. And so that ability to take control when everything else around you is burning, is appealing. I can understand that, but as you've touched on, that leads very quickly down quite a negative and harmful path, because then if it doesn't work, well, it must be something I didn't do. I didn't follow this program exactly to the letter. And there is, rather than actually looking and addressing it, what structural issues there might be that are preventing people from being well, or getting access to the things that they need. And
there's a very good book about this that I just finished reading. It's called The Gospel of Wellness by Rina Raphael, and it explores exactly that. And we're seeing this with the pandemic, the whole you do you now phase of the pandemic, where you have all of these structural issues and these public health issues, and instead we're focusing now on the individual. And now it's becoming very insidious to see institutions who have big institutional and structural problems saying, oh, we're offering wellness things for our employees. Go learn how to meditate. That'll take care of the problems. Exactly.
Do your wellness week. We'll put a yoga class on for you one day.
And I don't want to downplay the importance of having these individual means of dealing in the moment with stress and anxiety. Those can be important, but they are being sold as the sole solution to these big structural issues, and they really should not be.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a big problem, particularly with really big employers, that it's, we want you to work all of the hours, we expect you to work overtime and weekends and everything else. And, well, we don't, we can't mandate you come in on the weekend, but you do have more work than you can possibly do in the working week. But if you're suffering with depression or mental health issues or anxiety, well, you need yoga and mindfulness. And we'll put a class on for you maybe once a year, but we won't actually reduce your workload so that your brain has a bit more space to breathe.
Yeah, Rena has a good line about this in her book, Bath salts won't stop late night work emails.
Well, if it's not.
Talking about the onus being on the individual, one thing that I would like to see in terms of the realm of change is there being better safety measures in place so that it's clear to the consumer what it is that they're buying into or who it is that they're visiting. And this is something that feel like I'm a victim of, in terms of like having gone to naturopathic school and bought into this false idea that I was being trained as a physician and capable of carrying out primary care in a safe and effective way, but then also as a patient of the medical system in the US. I really think that it needs to be clear to the consumer, whether that consumer is buying something off a pharmacy shelf thinking that it's a cough syrup with an active ingredient versus a cough syrup with nothing in it, or the type of practitioner that they're seeing. And I took advantage of this as a naturopath because I was allowed to call myself a physician. And so like I did because I needed to make money. And I see this now with my friends and family back home, trying to navigate the very complicated and messed up American healthcare system, and not knowing who it is that they're seeing, what their credentials are, where they went to school, and can't even really be bothered to look that up because the system itself is so overwhelming. And the fact that they could even get an appointment and didn't have to call HMO to get pre-verification and yada, 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 it's terribly cumbersome for the patient and unfair.
And you even touched on it, that coming from inside the wellness industry to a point that, like, this idea that, well, I can sell you the good supplements, the supplements that are safe to take, that I've vetted, that I can tell you that they've been manufactured in a good plant and that they're reliable and the right stuff. Because there is that problem of lack of control and regulation over things, but also lack of clarity on what you should be looking for. And, well, I trust my naturopath. She sits and talks me through everything, and she says that this is the right supplement, so I'm just going to trust her and buy this one.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think just coming back to that idea of, where's the harm? I think, and what needs to change, because I think as particularly skeptics, and traditionally might think, you can recognise that the snake oil salesman and trying to, offer really, make ridiculous claims about treating very, very serious illnesses indeed. But I think maybe that isn't so obvious in the wellness industry, being able to actually call out these practitioners, but actually it is just snake oil salesman by another name, but now it's kind of a global enterprise, right? So I think, I'd like to ask the panel, how to really expand on that idea of what can we try and do to help call out these things when we see them, and actually is there some more structural things that need to change to help educate people and protect people?
Oh, it is tough. It is tough because, there are certain people who practice alternatives to medicine that have become these institutionalized healthcare professionals within their jurisdiction, and they have a professional order that regulates them. But if the people running the show, they also believe the weird things and the unsubstantiated claims of the practitioners themselves, then how is the regulation effective? There's something interesting happening in British Columbia, and I haven't not followed this very well since the pandemic started, but they were trying to rearrange how these orders were being basically controlled, or sort of how the professional order of these healthcare professions was being done, by having representatives from different professions like physicians and nurses all sitting on a common board, if memory serves. So that is an interesting idea, but that's the problem, is that once these professions are being legitimized through professional orders, it becomes very hard to do anything about this because they self-regulate, and they're not very good at self-regulating.
It's a thing we've discussed on the podcast before, that a particular example of a recent death of somebody who was treated with chiropractic, and it was ruled, they did an investigation, and it was ruled by the British Chiropractic Association that there was, it wasn't the fault of the practitioner, it wasn't that they administered chiropractic incorrectly, but that was the panel of people who made that decision were all chiropractors. They didn't have, people who were actual experts in the spine, because they just thought the chiropractors could deal with that.
In terms of products, you're allowed to make these vague claims for them. Mm-hmm. Things like, it promotes X, it supports Y, it helps with this system in your body. And to the average person, this looks like an evidence-based claim, whereas it is not. It's the kind of claim that you can make about anything that is not a pharmaceutical, because pharmaceuticals are much more tightly regulated. So we're allowing any kind of wellness product to be sold with these very vague claims that, from the perspective of the regulators, they're like, well, these are very separate claims from the ones we allow for pharmaceuticals, but to the average person, they look like genuine, almost medical claims.
Yeah.
The issue of regulation is tricky, and I am truthfully grappling with how to effectively communicate this, because professions self-regulate. Medical physicians self-regulate. I mean, the argument that we make in terms of medicines in the U.S. and vaccines being safe is that it's regulated by people, experts within that profession. But then, when it comes to naturopaths and alternative practitioners, we're making the argument, in fairness, because it's true, that regulation doesn't make that practice safe, and that in this case, self-regulation is bad. And I think that that is a difficult piece of information to effectively communicate, because why is it true here, but not there? And to sort of then break down why self-regulation in naturopathy and alternative medicine isn't working, I then have to get into all of the underpinnings of naturopathic education and how messed up the accreditation system is and what is being taught behind the scenes and how
It's systemic, it's not just...
It's like you need a website for this.
It's like one needs a website, naturopathicdiaries.com. And it takes so much time. And even though I feel like I've done a good job of laying out all of this information and making it user-friendly on my website, I still get a ton of emails with basic questions about these things, like, so what does accreditation mean in this case? Or how does regulation work here? And to Jonathan's point, even if that board is comprised of an integrative medical team, I mean, they're still self-selecting, right? They're selecting medical physicians who don't believe in vaccines or who are also trained in homeopathy or, whatever serves their purpose.
But I think that's an interesting point you make, because actually it just highlights how complicated it is, even where there is information to go to. Actually, people just find it quite bewildering, and they just want a straight answer. And, I personally was probably looking for some tips there, because, for me, I found that, wellness, that the discussion about wellness is, there's been a lot of creep in my workplace. And so, the idea of, like Alice said, wellness week, but also, mindfulness sessions. We'll put on a yoga session, or we'll do these things. You've got to take time to have self-care or do these things, but actually what they mean by self-care is, have a bath and feel better, not actually do something meaningful to help people, feel less stressed and less worried, etc. There's one very, very quick point that I want to ask the panel about, and that is, maybe the darker side to wellness. It seems quite light and fluffy. Maybe, why should we worry about it too much? But actually, as I'm sure the panel before has discussed, some of these wellness Instagram Influencers. Thank you, Jonathan.
My pleasure.
You can tell that the non-Instagram user actually has some quite dangerous overlaps with radical groups, and suddenly you're thinking about not taking a vaccine, but then that there's some overlaps there with, maybe
suddenly in a yoga cult.
Yeah.
There's a very important
Only
word.
hot yoga.
There's a very important word that provides an answer to this, which is conspirituality. There's a very good podcast called Conspirituality about this, which is a phenomenon where the conspiracy sphere, which was being discussed right before we came here, right, and the spiritual sphere are converging and they're overlapping. And at first it seemed very weird, and we really started to see this clearly during the pandemic. But they have very similar pillars in their philosophies, which is that nothing happens by accident, right? Nothing is as it seems, and everything is connected. And people in both of those spheres believe this, and so you are seeing radicalization of people in the spiritual wellness sphere who are buying into these grand conspiracy theories. And in part, putting this focus on the individual that the individual is in control of their health and it's all about their choices, it sort of feeds into this hero myth, right? And so now you're the hero of your own story and you're looking for a narrative. And those conspiracy theories, they feed you that narrative of who is good and who is evil and what the fight is and how we're going to win this thing. So yeah, you can get radicalized from wellness. I mean,
Yeah.
it's strange, but like we've all seen it on the internet. It's happening.
And we don't really engage with it so much because we think, well, it's just fluffy wellness stuff that it only really affects little women anyway, and we don't need to
Pastel
worry too
QAnon.
much about it. And then, you've got the pastel QAnoners on Instagram.
Yeah, in hindsight, I don't think it's a coincidence that around the time that I became super interested in naturopathy as a 16, 17, 18-year-old, I was also leaving evangelicalism. So I think there was a space there where I was looking for answers.
And that was filled with wellness.
And very pretty women.
So I think we've got about 5 minutes or so for questions. So anyone would like a question? I'm not sure who put their hand up first. I'm really sorry. So lady here, do you want to pass the box?
This is based, Britt touched on it earlier, and I'm not sure if you'd be able to answer this, but just thinking about regulation. So in the UK, when you graduate medical school, you are regulated by the General Medical Council. You have a GMC number.
Yeah.
You can only be a practicing doctor with a GMC number. If anyone asks for that number, you are obliged to give it to them so they can report you, whatever. I don't understand how it's legal in the US for to be able to call yourself a doctor.
Oi.
Sorry.
So, no. I'll give as quick as a summary as possible. So it's regulated within individual states. So there's 50 jurisdictions, and Puerto Rico, where naturopathy is regulated. So you go and you lobby to state lawmakers to get that to happen. And it just depends on if you can get licensed in that state. And depending on the state that you're in, not only can I receive a practitioner license, but you can also have a DEA number, which allowed me to then write prescriptions and to have a prescription pad and to rip off my pad and hand prescriptions. And so like if I happened to be working in a state that wasn't licensed or didn't regulate, then I would have gotten licensed in the nearest state to that in order to have that veil of legitimacy. And then if you're working in an unlicensed place, you're in this gray zone where it's actually really difficult to regulate and to control what's being given because there's no regulatory body to bring complaints to. So it's complicated in all the ways.
Yeah.
Lovely stuff. Thank you. Right, next question. We have a question here at front.
It seems like individualization is a big sort of driver of this. As we're moving traditional medicine towards more individualization with genetic testing for therapies and gene therapies and all that stuff, do you think we have an oncoming shitstorm where you've almost got that legitimacy of the individualization?
It could go either way, right? It could be that what people are looking for is some level of control, and so they want some individualization from their medications, and they're not getting it from their healthcare provider, so they see the wellness industry. And so if you put it back into medicine, it fills that gap and there's less of a need for wellness. But yeah, of course, it could also just legitimize it, and it could genuinely go either way. It depends how it's done. I think a lot of it's like we said, language and how things are framed makes a big difference.
And there is also a lot of hype about personalized medicine that is not met by the evidence. So even there, medicine is saying, "Oh, it's all personalized." No.
And it very much depends on the condition.
Very much so. And
some genetic conditions where that matters.
And our preliminary results that are interesting, but like we're nowhere near this complete personalization of medicine. So if we ever get there, if it's ever warranted, what will be the impact on what you're describing? I really don't know. Thank
you. Right, okay, we've got time for a couple more questions. Okay, so we had this gentleman over here at the end, and then on the same row.
It seems like a difference in narrative with alternative medicines versus normal medicines, where people will like recommend the alternative medicines that they've done because maybe they're more vague. Whereas if somebody's been given corticosteroids by their doctor, they're not going around saying, "I feel great, you should take these too." Whereas if it's jade eggs or sunning or whatever, then they're more happy to do that. So I just want to ask, like, how much more of this is spread because of that vector where people become evangelized of the medicines they've took and then promote that on?
Maybe that's something Britt can touch on.
Can you just repeat the last part of the question one more time? How much?
So how much of the sort of spread of the popularity of alternative medicines is to do with people then becoming sort of zealots for the things that they've taken part in?
I guess it just depends on, I mean, I don't really know how to answer that question. I'm just trying to imagine myself working as a naturopath now. So if I was working as a naturopath now, I would definitely be on Instagram. I would definitely be on TikTok. And I would be taking, with consent, pictures of all of these therapies that I was doing and how beautiful the clinic looked. And I'd throw in some flowers and some, nice salts and things. And then I would be providing testimonials at every chance to sort of reinforce.
But even your patients might as well. I believe that may be the point of people who are trying these things and they feel like they're benefiting from this, telling their friends, as opposed to, hey, this prescription medication that I just got, you should try this as well.
I understand. Yeah. No. Yes. You're right. I understand the point of the question now. Yeah. Absolutely. And in fact, that's where my business came from. It was from happy patients. So there was this aspect of like, tell your friends.
Yeah, which is very frowned upon with medication, as it should be, because,
Have you tried this ADHD medication? It's great. Try it.
It does happen in retirement homes that a lot of the grandmas...
God, yes.
We have a yellow one.
Well, apparently Therese Kofi is giving her friends her antibiotics, so yes, for antibiotic resistance, that's going to be fun. Yeah. But yeah, it's absolutely a thing. I used to be part of a community of people who have the same condition that I have, and one of their rules was we don't talk about doses of medications, and if we can avoid talking about the type of medication, we do, and it would get blanked out of discussion posts.
Right, so I'm really sorry. I think we're out of time for your last question, but hopefully you can catch the panellists and ask them again. So I'd just like to thank Britt, Alice and Jonathan. Thank you very much.